notice Charlie Sykes is below me, not in real life, but in this screen. He's above me in all things other than
I
on
think in
this
the
screen.
hierarchy of things, yeah. Fair.
This is awesome for me to do, folks. If you don't, I think you probably already do, but if you do not subscribe, this is the most important thing you can do on this Substack Live. Charlie's Substack is called To the Contrary. Lots and lots of you already subscribe. If you don't, just go subscribe. I mean, like, there's a handful of people who I read everything they write. It's not that many people, if I'm being totally candid. Charlie is one of them. So go
Thank you.
subscribe to Charlie immediately. We're going to go for a while here, Charlie, and I want to start, and just so folks, just to give you a little insight, Charlie and I, we didn't really talk much about what we're going to talk about because we both kind of want it to be a little free flowing. I
Yeah.
always think like the worst thing about cable TV, which we've both done a lot of, is it's kind of a very formulaic discussion. It's like, okay, now you talk, now you talk, now you talk. And I don't love that. And we have a little bit more time. So let's stretch out. All right,
Yeah.
Charlie, I want to start with something that you don't know about. It won't be scary, I promise. But so I do a mailbag post every Friday where people write in questions and I try to answer them. And I want to read you something that someone wrote. I'm not going to read the whole. Actually, I will read the whole thing. It's not that long. Okay. This is a question. It's not really a question, it's a statement, like many questions you get, but this is the question. Ready? I am planning on not paying attention to news for the next 4 years except for my local news. Ignorance is bliss, and the nonsense that will transpire after January 20th will be ridiculous and scary. I'm still shocked that there were voters out there that just don't care how badly Trump behaves, so I am done. My husband and I left the Republican Party and are now registered as independents. Now, I have a view on this, but what do you say? Is that I understand that view. Is that the right view in your mind? Because Donald Trump's going to be president in 3 days. How should people who did not vote for him, who do not support him, and who may be vehemently opposed to him, how should they engage? Or not?
I think about this a lot. My first answer would be I really feel you. I understand where you're coming from. I know a lot of people who feel exactly the same way, and I think it's been reflected in the ratings. But the reality is that we don't have the luxury of tuning out. We don't have the luxury of pretending that politics doesn't matter.
Right.
Charles Krauthammer wrote very eloquently about all of this. If societies can get a lot of things right, but if they get their politics wrong, terrible things happen, and that is just the reality. But I do think it's important to think about how you modulate your response. How do you go into what's about to happen? And by the way, Monday is going to be the mother of all news dumps. I mean, I am expecting shock and awe. I'm expecting a news cycle that's going to make it's going to make people's heads explode. But so how do you modulate your response? How do you keep your sanity? And I think part of it is take a deep breath and pay it and try to pay attention to the things that matter and not be distracted by all the noise. And I also think find people who you actually trust. Don't necessarily stand in front of the fire hose of everything. Find the people you trust. And by the way, when I say that, there's a caveat. Don't fall into another information bubble, because I think you and I are going to talk about this.
Absolutely. Yes.
We got here in part because people went into the bubbles where they were told what they wanted to hear all the time. All of their priors were always confirmed. They're in these information silos, and we see that forming again. That's my one caution. Try, and I know there's going to be some blowback, but I'm going to write about this on my newsletter over the weekend. Try to keep a sense of humor and perspective about things. Try to have some sort of a stoic modesty about what we can accomplish and what we can't accomplish. But I do understand and I sympathize. But I would also make this point more seriously, that dropping out and tuning out is exactly what the authoritarian extremists want you to do. That is why they flood the zone with shit, because who wants to be under that fire hose of shit all the time? So don't give in, don't give up. The things you care about are still worth paying attention to.
And I would say too, just one quick thing, is just because let's say you voted for Kamala Harris, you hate Trump. Just because those two things are true does not mean nothing that you care about, are interested in, are engaged in can move in a positive direction over the
Right.
next 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Things change.
it's not
Yeah.
right, exactly, and that's what it's kind of like. So you're just going to tune out for 4 years? Like that seems like the assumption that everything has to be bad all the time. This is what I love that word you use, modulate. Like because one of the things I'm constantly struck by, and I get it in our business because there's a way to monetize outrage and everything is the worst.
Yeah.
A lot
Right.
of people make a lot of money doing
Yep.
that. But as a lived existence, the truth of the matter is not everything is a mountain. There are
Right.
mountains.
Yeah.
Absolutely are mountains.
Right.
And when there is a mountain, I always say, when Trump does something egregious, and we both know he's going to do things that are egregious, fine. But to fixate on everything every day as a mountain means that the mountain becomes meaningless. If everything's a mountain, nothing's a mountain.
Yeah, I think we went through that in 2017, where everybody's hair was on fire all the time about every single thing. Now
Mm-mm.
I think we were kind of expecting that. So again, part of what we have to do, and this is the larger we, is try to figure out what is just the noise and what actually matters. What are the distractions and what's the substance? And that's something I'm really going to be trying to pay attention to, and also not get caught in that doom loop of saying the same thing over and over and over
Yes.
again. The
Ah,
same, I mean, I was listening to somebody today, and it was, a podcast, and it was the same rant, same angry tone, same humorless approach that, frankly, I've heard for 9 years. Now, I say this as somebody throwing stones from a glass house because I've been doing this for 9 years. And I think that one of the things we also need to do is, like, we can't, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. So I think we're going to have to find creative ways to talk about this, to deal with this. I do think it's important to occasionally tune out. You do this, I know,
yep.
uh, probably less than I do, but where you just back off on. But the ranty tone, the bubbles, I think are extremely dangerous.
And I want to just put a
I
pin in
want to
something you
reserve my right to rant, though, just so you know.
totally. Oh gosh, we
I
all
will.
need a good rant from time to time,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
friend. I want to put a pin in something you said because I think it's so important. It's self-serving for me and for you at some level, but I also think it's true,
yeah.
which is I always say like you don't need to read all the coverage. I mean, it's impossible, but you don't need to
I
read all the
get.
coverage. What you need, the way that I've always thought about my journalism is I'm the cruise director. I'm telling you, or no, actually, I'm the concierge at the hotel.
Right.
I'm like, okay, you've arrived in Milwaukee. There's lots of places that you can eat. Here are the three places I really like. Or here's the show you should go see. I'm telling you, amid all this shit, all this content, all this dis and misinformation, right? That's getting worse and
Yeah,
worse.
yeah, yeah,
But I'm the guy who can say, pay attention to this. And you know
yeah.
what? As importantly, don't pay attention to that. And that's, I think, a role
Right.
you play too. And it's like,
I
I think
want
that
to.
I increasingly, I hope that voices like that, and it doesn't have to be me and it doesn't have to be you, but increasingly, I think people find 4 or 5 of those people and not just people who affirm your priors.
Well, okay, that is the danger. Okay, I'd actually had didn't answer your main question about the fact that things change. You
Hmm.
know, this too shall pass. One of the advantages of being of somebody of my advanced age is I've seen the cycles come and go. Imagine what you thought the world was going to look like in 1972. Imagine if you were a conservative Republican, the day after the 1964 Goldwater wipeout. You thought there'd never be a Republican again, um, a Republican elected again. These things go in cycles. They are not forever. And I think that's important to remember. We have gone through very tough things. Now, I understand. I am not understating the the challenges that we face here, but this too will pass. There will be a time when you turn the page. And quite frankly, going back to your question about the person who was going to drop out, I'll tell you what a piece I'm working on for my Substack newsletter. It's called "Confessions of an Irrelevant Man." And somebody went on a big rant about how Charlie, no one's more irrelevant in Republican politics than Charlie Sykes. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to cop to all of that. You know what? We lost, but there's a certain liberation in irrelevance
Totally.
that you can
Freedom's just
stand back and
another
go,
word for nothing left to lose.
exactly. You don't have to believe to take the party line. You don't have to take the whole smorgasbord of the partisan talking points. You don't have to hang out with shitty people. You don't have to support shitty causes. You can actually sit back, and this may sound corny, but you go and say, what can I do? I can live. I know that we're about to see a lot of stuff, but I can live my life with integrity. And I also can step back and go, you know what? I'm out of these partisan bubbles, so I can actually tell you what I really think. Now that is a luxury. It shouldn't be a luxury, but Chris, you know that it is, because
Absolutely, it
there
is.
are, to be able to say, you know what? I agree with you on this. I don't agree with you on this. I think this is foolish. There is that sense of take a deep breath. We're liberated. There's going to be a show. We're going to watch the show. I'm not downplaying the threat, but I also think that we need to understand, it's a little bit like the serenity prayer. Control the things you can control. But when you realize, you know what? I left it all on the field. Now, in this my confessions of an irrelevant man, one of the things that, quite frankly, I burned all my bridges. I burned all my boats,
Yep.
you know. But I also look back and go, you know what? There's nothing about Trump or this political moment that I didn't say. There was no, argument that I didn't make. It's not like, well, if we would have done this or would have done that, it would have been different. So I think that's at the end of this process. If you feel that you've done everything that you can do and you've lived with
Yep.
integrity and you follow the truth as opposed to spreading the latest talking point, it's not the worst fate you could have.
That's what I always say to people who complain and they're like, "Why do you love Trump so much?" And I'm like,
Yeah,
it's not like I never promised you predictable partisanship. I promised you that I would try to be as authentic based on my years of doing this, as authentic as I can be. It doesn't mean I'm right.
yeah,
It just means I'm trying my best to say, I think based on what I know, based on what I've seen, this is good and this is bad. I've been wrong many times before. I
yeah.
thought Hillary Clinton was beating Donald Trump. I'm always saying, like, and I want to make one other point on your change thing. I always think of this. So I grew up in rural Connecticut in the 80s. And we had like, I forget what it was called, but in this small town I grew up in, there was like a pizza place and there was a place called like the Video Hut or whatever, right? And they had like one copy of the original Star Wars and one copy of Back to the Future, right? And if that copy was
Yeah.
out, tough shit.
Yeah.
And then a Blockbuster opened in the town near me. And I thought, this is the greatest company. They had 50 copies of everything. And I thought, this is the greatest thing that has ever happened. This company will be around forever.
Right.
If you told 15-year-old Chris Cillizza in 1991 Blockbuster would cease to exist when he was 40s, and this is your point, change is guaranteed, it's just not guaranteed on our preferred schedule.
Right. It's the pace is picking up. I mean, the pace of change is so rapid that anybody that thinks they know what the world's going to look like in 4 years, have you really been paying attention to all of this? I mean, in terms of politics, look how things have changed. In terms of the media, in terms of technology and the way of communication. I mean, what are we doing right now? We're talking to
It's
each other on.
stunning.
I mean, it is stunning, and
Yep.
it's so funny because right after the 2016 election, um, I'm not trying to disparage anyone, but I was named to a you know blue ribbon commission to ask what went wrong,
Those are
and
the
I
best
remember,
kind of commissions.
and and we had good meals, but I was thinking about this actually last night. All the discussions that we had were basically fighting the last war. They were like, what do we do with the problem of bots? Okay, it's like what. Remember when's the last time we talked about bot? In,
Totally.
in 2017, we could not have imagined all the changes in the media. I'm an old newspaper guy. When I first got out of my father was a newspaper man. I was a newspaper man. If you would have told me the way the media landscape would change, what would happen to newspapers, you're a newspaper guy. I wouldn't
Absolutely.
I find it stunning when you see, how that's all changed. What's
Pace.
happened to establishment media, the way that people consume their news. So again, given the fact that this pace of change is not going to that arc is not going to go down, I think we ought not to be too pessimistic about what could possibly happen in the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, imagine what the world looked like. I have a picture of my mother and her first husband in World War II. What do you think that people sat around in 1941 and thought that the world was going to look like 20 years after that? Couldn't even imagine. You could
No.
literally not imagine how dark everything was, how terrible everything was, what the threat was. I mean, imagine when I, I should have looked up how old you are, but I was
48.
watching. I was watching a show the other day. I had the flashback of the late is it the early '70s or the late '60s when we all sat by the TV set and watched the draft. And what young people we talk about how what the challenges young people face today. Imagine sitting in your living room waiting for your birthday to be called, knowing that you might be compelled to go to Vietnam.
Correct.
I mean, or Iraq. Um, so again, don't assume that we know the future.
Yeah. I want to. So I know everyone wants to talk about Trump, and we can talk. We talk some about him, but I'm actually I'm intrigued by the Democratic Party in the wilderness at some level. They do not have the White House. They do, I mean, narrowly, but they
Yeah.
don't control the House and they don't control the Senate. And I always note, Republicans have unified control in 24 of the 50
Yeah,
states, gubernatorial and state legislative, which I know people don't care as much about, but is super important.
very important.
I want to let's first talk about the outgoing president, and then I want to talk about sort of the Democratic Party going forward. So this week, Joe Biden gives a foreign policy speech on Monday. He gives his farewell address from the Oval Office on Wednesday. He gives an interview with Lawrence O'Donnell on Thursday, and then today he. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. He declares the Equal Rights Amendment has been ratified, but that he's not requesting the archivist to technically say that. Can you explain, like, what is the last 7 days that we've seen of Joe Biden tell us about how Joe Biden is ending this presidency? Then I have a couple questions about what Democrats do going forward.
Okay, well, can we just start with this? The kind of the performative delusion that the president has just simply declared that the Equal Rights Amendment is part of the Constitution.
So
I
weird.
mean, I have to tell you that before we came on here, I was on social media and I was over on Blue Sky, and this is again, you can tell that you're in a bubble, an information bubble, if you think that Joe Biden has just amended the Constitution unilaterally. And
Right.
I was like waving my hand, saying, "No, sorry, guys.
None of
This
this
is
means
purely
anything.
symbolic." Yeah, he doesn't
It's
mean
like the Department
anything.
of Government Efficiency right now. It has as much authority as the Chris and Charlie committee. Now, it will
Exactly.
eventually have some, but it doesn't matter at all right now.
That's right. Speaking of, like, see, I can embrace my irrelevance. They're like screaming into the wind with it. But it is amazing the number of people who believe that and are being told that. And I saw one of these one of the newer websites has a piece from a Harvard professor saying it is now an officially a part of the Constitution. It's like no, and you're misleading people and you're raising expectations. So I mean not Donald Trump, Joe Biden, going out the door is just throwing scraps to various groups of the groups. Part of the problem the Democrats have is the groups. These groups which have their little niche issues and they sort of demand things no matter how impolitic or unreasonable they might be. And so he's doing that, which leads me to the larger question, and I'll give you the short answer. In the last couple of, and again, I understand that a lot of people still like Joe Biden, although the polls would suggest they're
I was going to
smaller.
say less.
I mean, and he has some real accomplishments, and history might be kinder. But I have to say that his delusion has been on full display. And I just can't get past the fact that you watch him, you think, seriously, did he and the people around him think that he could be the president for another 4 years? And, we're talking about bubbles. And one of my regrets, and I on my Substack newsletter, I have the, no regrets, but I do have a regret here, is that I was among those who were shouted down by the Democratic Party bubble, the claque that said, "Stop talking about Joe Biden's age. Stop talking about his age."
Cares? No regular people care.
That's right. Except that regular people did care, and I
Yes,
made
the
I
polls
made
showed
this
regular
point.
people cared.
I over and over again, I said, you literally cannot have a conversation with anyone in America about Joe Biden without the age coming up. And yet on social media here on the podcast, we're told we can't talk about it. And as a result, they created a bubble within a bubble. And
Yep.
you had a great video this morning about
Yes.
I mean,
God, wasn't that
I
crazy?
mean, you pick. It was really funny because I had been just reading the New York Times thing that Chuck Schumer told him that the polls show you have a 5% chance of winning, and this apparently was news to the president of the United States, who, well, I don't want to steal your thunder, but you're pointing out
No,
the point.
go.
He did not know that. He was so deep in the bunker that either he didn't, his pollsters were not telling him this, or there's alternatives. They told him and he forgot. I'm sorry, but
Yeah,
you
which
know.
is right. As
Yeah.
I said in that video, neither good,
Yeah,
neither option good. But exactly, how the hell? I just, I am people. One of the most frustrating things that I get is people say, "Move on. Who
yeah,
cares?" And I'm like, well, for a couple reasons, I don't think you should just move on. Number one, the way that Biden conducted himself and the way that Harris ran her campaign, at least in part, gave us Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump didn't have any agency. I think he
right.
did some things right
Sure.
in terms of the
And,
campaign.
and
But also, like, if those who do not understand history are doomed to repeat it, right? I mean, this idea that we should just memory hole the fact that it's, I think it's at least a possibility now that Biden was suffering from some significant
yeah,
level of cognitive decline, that we should just, oh, well, it doesn't matter because he's a Democrat and Donald Trump is president now. Well, I'm not going to be in the camp of, because Donald Trump is president, nothing bad Democrats do matters. That's how we got into the mess.
well, see, my perspective on this is slightly different because, and I think I've been somewhat consistent on this, that Joe Biden really had one job. He had one prime directive, which was to hold Donald Trump accountable and keep him from returning to the White House.
Hmm.
And that is my frustration. So I know that there are a lot of people who are going, no, 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 we should talk about the green energy bill. We should talk about the infrastructure bill. And I'm like, the main uh, goal and job of the Biden White House in 2024 was not reelecting Joe Biden. It was beating Donald Trump, and that got lost in the shuffle. So, and I will also admit that up until that debate, I was very concerned, but had bought into the conventional wisdom that the Democrats just didn't have a plan B. Remember, we were told that over and over and over again.
Absolutely. He's the
That
only one who can win.
so therefore, that's why you should shut up. And by the way, this point you're making here, if you are in denial about how you screwed up last time, you are not going to avoid screwing up next time. So this important conversation, and I think that a lot of people were shocked by that debate, and horrified by it because it was a reality check. It was, and then, but there was still an attempt after that among people who say, we insist that you ignore the evidence of your own eyes.
Totally.
And that
Totally.
doesn't
He's
work.
fine. And
Yeah.
this is the information, this is the bubble thing that I think you started with that I just want to keep coming back to, which is, it's like, if after that debate you said, it's fine, he's still better than Donald Trump. Like, again, Joe Biden is he's the president of the United States. Like, if you thought that that was okay, you are in a bubble and you need to break out of it. Like that. I mean,
It-
I was amazed at the number of people on Substack, on social media,
I was too.
who were like, how dare you, you ageist? I was like, did you watch the same thing I
Yeah.
watched?
Yeah.
Like, I don't have anything against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And by the way, and I've said this many times, I think Donald Trump is effectively amoral, and it's dangerous to put an amoral person in a
Oh,
position
yeah.
of leadership. Like, I'm not rooting for Donald Trump, but it is impossible as a thinking human with, like you said, ears and eyes that work, to watch that and be like, it's fine, no big deal.
Right, and I think that the fact that they went along with that and they misread the 2022 elections, and they were telling themselves some stuff. And so I probably shouldn't tell this story, but is there I think there's
There's
a
stories.
I think there's a statute of limitations on this. Um, the a few days after that debate, there had been a pre-scheduled meeting of certain people, of which I am part of that genre, with people from the Biden world. And everybody was sitting around with their pet ideas about the campaign and everything. And I felt like the kid going, "What? Wait." And I deeply regretted this instantly, because these were high-ranking people, and I should not have used this language, but I was the one who said at a certain point, "I think everyone in this room is underestimating the pure fuckitude of this moment." And I used that word because it was like, wait, the whole country, the whole world just saw that
Yeah.
this man is not going to be able to win this election, and he is not going to be able to serve another 4 years. And how are we talking about anything else right now other than the urgency of that moment? Now, I think that within the Democratic Party, they quickly coalesced, obviously, in the next few days.
Hmm.
But that level of denial and the danger of bubbles, I mean, so I think that if you're making a list of why bubbles are really scary, and by the way, Chris, people, I know some of the blowback we're going to get on all of this. I have spent 9 years writing one story after another, after another, after another about the right wing alternative reality universes. I have written one thing about, after another, about, the MAGA disinformation, the addiction to, bullshitty ideas. So what I think kind of was shocking was to watch kind of the same sort of thought
Totally.
process over there.
Yes.
And they were now, the Never Trump movement basically was as a movement based on introspection, like what the hell just happened on the right, and you weren't seeing that on, at least. But again, now we know how that story ended, and tragically, I think that Joe Biden is going to be remembered. As he's a, they told him he was going to be FDR. Instead, he's going to be Benjamin Harrison, and I'm sorry.
Yeah. I I want to let's look forward. And one thing that jumped out at me, and it's one little thing, but I in the learning your lessons thing was I saw this come out of Capitol Hill that liberal staff on Capitol Hill want to work a 32-hour work week, and I was like, man, you've really learned the lessons of the campaign. Like, I mean, what do you make of, and I think, look, it's early days. Joe Biden's still president. Donald Trump is not president yet. I think Democrats are still reeling at some level to try to figure out, okay, what the hell do we do? But does that kind of stuff worry you in terms of like, did you to the do you not appreciate the total fuckitude of the situation point? Like, you don't have the House, you don't have the Senate, you don't have the White House, you don't have a majority of the governorships, you don't have the state legislatures. Like, you're not in a strong position, and it feels like you're doubling down on the same kind of like vibesy wokeism crap that did not appeal to people outside of the Democratic base.
All right. So again, I want to put this in the context of that am among those who is deeply concerned about the fascist tendencies of the regime that is coming into power. I'm sorry to use the word regime, but and again, if anyone goes back and sees the kinds of things, the warnings that I have been issuing
Hmm.
about what Trump is doing, and I think they pose a real danger to the rule of law, to national security, to the public health, all of those things. And it is because I am so alarmed about that I agree with you completely about the fuckitude of these young Hill progressive staffers who are in such a bubble that they sat around, I don't know, in somebody's cramped, efficiency apartment with stale pizza and said, let's all write a letter saying that we should have a 32-hour work week. I mean, it's funny because I wrote down, like, three bubble issues. No, Joe Biden did not just enact the ERA. No, what do I have here? Yeah, the Progressive Caucus as well. What was the mentality on the part of these staffers who are about to face unitary
Yep.
Republican rule with the shock and awe aggressive agenda of the Republican Party? and they thought that this would be a good time to say, "Hey, let's go to 32 hours." You know, because the moment that came out of that room, everybody said, "What a stupid idea." I mean, even Elizabeth Warren is ripping on
Right, right.
for all of that. But the people that ought to be the most upset about these bubbles are the ones who understand how crucial it is not to be stupid at this particular moment.
Yep.
You know, don't be. If you really think that he poses an existential threat, then you can't indulge all of your priors. You can't, become obsessed with some, you know, woke niche issue. You have to figure out, all right, if it's an existential threat, we need to do everything possible. We need to be smart about it.
I think
So,
that's incredibly well said. And I think that that message injected into the summer of 2024 Harris campaign might have helped, which is, if the threat is existential, then you cannot just, if you really believe that. And I think honestly, one of the problems for Democrats was, by the end, people were like, is it that existential? Because like it doesn't really seem, you know what I mean? Uh, you really believe that, you must change your behavior in ways to react to the nature of the threat. And there was not that much evidence that that was happening during the campaign, at least
well,
to my mind.
okay, I agree and disagree. As you know, I actually supported her, and in part, just so you know where I'm coming from, when Liz Cheney came to Wisconsin and to stand with her, I'm going to stand with Liz Cheney. So that's where
Hmm.
I come from. If
Hmm.
Liz Cheney, because she's making the existential argument. And interestingly enough, Kamala Harris is getting a lot of shit from progressive Democrats for, what were you hanging around with these never Trumpers like Liz
Totally.
Cheney and everything.
Yes, I have
But
seen that
I have to
strain.
say
Yep.
that I thought that was important. um, it was a huge leap for many of us to do that. But if she's going to say, "I'm going to appear with Liz Cheney, who is going to explain the danger that Donald Trump poses," then I think that was good. Now, having said that, then you get the question of, yeah, is that enough to move to the center on a lot of issues? And I'm sorry to keep coming back to the bubble. Um,
It's critically important. I mean,
well, the Trump campaign spent, and you might have better information than I do on this, but Trump campaign spent more than $100 million on one ad.
I know the ad you're
One,
talking about. I saw it the
I know.
weekend before the
I
election
think
in North Carolina.
I think I got it off your Substack. It's the ad about transgenderism,
They
and
them,
so
Trump is for us.
and that ad was pounded in all of the swing states. Here in Wisconsin, you could not turn on
Yep.
the television without pounding, pounding, pounding. Democrats never really pushed back or answered it, in part because I think they were afraid of setting off a backlash from their own groups, from the progressives. And maybe that's true, given the structure of the party.
You
She
pointed
didn't
out a
have
lot
that
of
wiggle room.
groups. Yes.
And she was saddled with some things she said back in 2019 when she was first running, when she was, pandering to the progressive base. And this would have been a moment for a kind of a sister soldier moment. Like, I was wrong about this. This is where I'm coming down. But I don't know that the Democratic Party right now would have been ready. And I will tell you that I don't sense, speaking of the Democratic bubble, I don't think they understood how potent an issue that was, or why
Not.
or why it was moving votes. And on a certain cable network that I cannot mention, that I can, of course, can mention, but I'm not going to. I don't recall a single conversation in which somebody like me was asked, "How is that playing in Wisconsin?
Yep.
Is this a problem for Democrats?" Because I would have said, "Oh my God, it's a huge problem."
Yep.
And yet, they didn't see it until after the election, I think.
Which gets to your bubble point. Okay, I'm going to give you two names of Democratic elected officials who I'm intrigued by. And I want you to give me your immediate gut reaction on what the next year, and I know that's hard even, but the next year looks like for these two people. Are you ready?
Sure.
Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. What is the next? What is she a voice that the Democratic Party should push?
Well, look, the Democratic Party is not going to listen to my advice on all of this, but
Yeah, me neither.
um, she's obviously a very attractive, articulate spokesman. But given where I come from, no, that's not the direction I want to see the Democratic Party go. I think this country needs two rational political parties. Clearly, the Republicans are no longer a rational political party. The Democrats need to figure out not how to appeal to people in Burlington, Vermont, and Berkeley, California, and Madison, Wisconsin. They need to be able to appeal to people who have different agendas. I'm not sure that she is one of them.
Okay, the second one, and this one I have, this can go 1,000 different ways. John Fetterman.
You know
What do you think
what?
of him?
I'm going to tread lightly there because he's a unpredictable guy who's had some unpredictable moves. Look, he at least understands that you cannot keep beating the same
Yes.
drums after what happened in all seven of the swing states. And so it is important for Democrats to say maybe we should listen to some of these people, without buying into their agenda. And this is a hard nuance, Chris, and this is difficult. But see, as I come from a conservative background, so I kind of know where I know where these people are coming from. I know what is motivating them, but also know that when I say listen to what they're saying, it's not saying and therefore go along with Elon Musk and Donald
Hmm.
Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Peter Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. You need to separate it out and saying there are some things that you need to listen to while still fighting and rejecting the MAGA bullshit. And
Hmm.
that's a kind of a lonely place to be in right now in
It
American
is. It's
politics.
easier. It's easier to be. I always say, if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, "I want to start a Substack," I don't have any politics. I'd say, make the Substack as anti-Trump or as pro-Trump consistently as
Yeah.
possible, because it's lonely in the like. Well, not one side or one person is right all the time, every single time.
One of the worst things that happened to Democrats was when they developed this thing about you're engaging in both sidesism.
Both siderism, yes.
Which I'm sure you got hit with a lot. Like if you say, "Hey, maybe there's an issue over here," no, you're engaging in both sidesism. And what both sidesism translated into was never question our own side, never engage in any introspection, never ask whether or not there are things that we are doing that is contributing to the problem. Because if both sidesism is a political sin, then by definition only one side is the problem. Now, look, I've spent the last 9 years hammering on one side. And I think part of the problem was that Trumpism was so appalling that it felt gratuitous to say, and maybe we shouldn't really be talking about, pronouns right now.
Right.
I mean, maybe
Right.
that's not yet.
Because the thing over here was so big
Right,
that it blotted out the things that were real but smaller over here.
right. So, it's that is frustrating. But you are right, and I do sense right now, and I'll be interested in your take, Chris, that our politics is about to become more radicalized, more polarized. Um, I had originally had many, many conversations with people about, well, is there room for a new centrist party, a center right, center left coalition? And for a long time, I would have been part of that movement, that conversation. But right now, that space feels like it's being abandoned. Is that both in the media and in the political incentives, exactly what you just said. Go hard to the extreme, the loudest, the most. That seems to be where people are, at least for now.
And I always, when people ask me why is that incentive structure broken, I was like, go up to your bedroom or your bathroom and look in the mirror. And it's not just you, person, but it's us. Look, politicians are a reactive species. If we rewarded them working across the aisle, they would work across the aisle. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not they're not inherently incapable
Oh,
of
right,
doing it,
right.
but we celebrate who's the most well-known House member right now? It's either AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene. And before that, it was Matt Gaetz. Well, I mean, those are not centrists, no matter what you think of either of them. And so it's like
No.
when we incentivize that kind of behavior, we're going to get more of that behavior. I want to ask you. This is selfish, but because I continue to think around this, one of the things I'm most struck by about this election as I try to think forward is Donald Trump wins all 7 swing states. Okay.
Yeah.
Ruben Gallego gets elected to the Senate in Arizona while Donald Trump is winning. Jackie Rosen gets reelected in Nevada while Donald Trump is winning. And this is where I want to talk to you. Tammy Baldwin gets reelected while Donald Trump is winning Michigan. And by the way, Alyssa Slotkin wins an open seat
Yeah.
in Michigan.
Yeah.
How do you explain if somebody comes to you and says, Charlie, how the hell does Donald Trump win Wisconsin? And on that same day, that same electorate reelects Tammy Baldwin. What does that tell you about going forward?
Well, I wish I could break down the numbers for you because Wisconsin has a lot of paradoxical results. I mean, the fact that we are represented in the United States Senate by Tammy Baldwin and by Ron
And
Johnson
Johnson. It's so
tells you that
true.
things are weird. And sometimes the answer is just the nature of the electorate. What happened with Kamala Harris in Wisconsin was not that she fell off the table. It's that Donald Trump brought in a huge number of new voters. I mean, and that's really the kind of the story that he brought in these low propensity voters who may not have been avid consumers of the news. But those numbers, if you would have asked, I think the political pros, they would have had targets for numbers. And in Wisconsin, they would have said, yeah, we pretty much hit all of our targets, except that the Republicans came in with so many more. Now, having said that, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I suspect there were a lot of people that came out of the woodwork to vote for Donald Trump and left the ballot
Totally.
blank
That's the
when it
the
came down to
the
the
that's the
undervotes.
Chuck Todd like lone gunman theory. They came in, they voted for Trump, and they didn't give a shit about Tammy Baldwin versus Eric Hovde.
Yeah, and,
They're
and
not
there, and,
because they're
yeah,
not Republicans.
right,
They're Trump people, right? They're not
yes,
party
yeah.
people.
That's my gut sense. Also, Eric Hovde was not an outstanding candidate. I knew him the first time he ran for Senate, and let's just say that he has a very, very high opinion of himself, and sometimes that kind of overweening arrogance doesn't play that well in a state like Wisconsin. So Wisconsin Democrats. This is kind of interesting. It's kind of a counter story. Wisconsin Democrats have now lost, two major elections. They lost the election for governor that they should have won a couple of years ago. They lost the Senate race that I think they thought that people should have won, in part because they ran some pretty shitty candidates. They ran these out of state millionaires, people who hadn't even been in the state for a long time, came in, were not good candidates. By the way, Democrats have also blown things. I still am quite. I still haven't quite gotten over the fact that Democrats didn't manage to knock off Ron Johnson
It
when they
is
had.
amazing to me Ron Johnson is still in the Senate. When I see him on TV, I'm like, how the hell how the hell has he won as many times as he's won? But
Well, well, okay. I mean, he and I used to be friends. I want to make this clear because some your viewers will know that, but something broke
yep,
in his brain, and he was ripe to be defeated. And the Democrats in Wisconsin chose maybe the one candidate who
yep,
could not beat Ron Johnson. He came
yep.
incredibly close, which was an indication that indicate in Mandela Barnes. It was an indication, and there were people like me saying, don't do this, don't do this. If Mandela Barnes had gotten the same number of votes as Democrat Tony Evers, Ron Johnson wouldn't be a senator anymore.
Yep.
So what you had was a lot of Democrats who came out and voted in the midterm, and then went, yeah, can't do the Mandela Barnes thing. So he got something like, and fact check me on this, 50,000 fewer votes than the other Democrat on the ballot, which tells you how vulnerable Johnson was, but also once again, a missed opportunity. Do you really want to beat these people, or do you feel the need to stroke your ideological priors. And Democrats really have to decide that.
I love that, and it got me to thinking. I was thinking Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin. Not since Rod Grams and Paul Wellstone in Minnesota have we had two senators who are. I
Yeah.
was just trying to think of the last sort of pairing where
Yeah.
you're like, how the hell did the same basic electorate vote for these two
Well,
people?
okay. I mean, we are the state that sent Joe McCarthy to Washington, and then replaced him with William Proxmire. I mean, we have had some of the most, prominent liberal senators in the country, and then you had people like, Bob Caston, and you had, well, anyway. So yeah, we have a weird tradition, and a lot of it has to do with the nature of the electorate. Um, a small off-year electorate looks very different than these now ginormous,
Yes.
presidential year electorates, and that's just a reality.
Um, I want to point forward a little bit more before we end. What Everybody's focused on Trump's first 100 days, and I know, I mean, if he does all the things
Yeah.
he said he's going to do in the first day, it's going to be a 97-hour day, right? So, like,
Yes.
he'll do a bunch of things. What do you think Democrats need to accomplish, or at least begin accomplishing, in the first 100 days of Trump? Because I do feel like we have so much focus on Trump. Like, Democrats, I know I keep beating this drum, but like, Democrats are out of power at every single level. To insist that everything is fine, yeah, one of my
Yeah.
favorite spins was a bunch of people on Substack and elsewhere when Trump dropped below 50% of the popular vote, they were like, "See? Huh? See?
I know.
No, see, he still won the popular vote and he got 312 elector votes and he won every single one of the swing states. If you are latching onto everything's fine because he got 49.86% of the national popular vote, I feel like you're lost. But what do Democrats need to do? Whether it's a policy thing, whether it's a putting forward a certain person or certain people, whether it's sort of deciding their tack towards Trump. I mean, it's a pretty open ended question, but like, after Trump's 100 days, where do you think Democrats should be?
Okay, well, first of all, I know that the 100 days is the traditional metric going back to FDR. I think we need to focus on the first hundred hours.
Mm,
I think
hmm.
there's going to be so much that's going to happen on Monday. The real difficulty is going to be picking the targets. If there are 96 things that are absolutely outrageous, what do you do? So
Yes.
there's going to have to be much more message discipline. And I will say this, that the early indications are not reassuring. I really thought that he had teed up for the Democrats a great opportunity by nominating egregiously unqualified people. I mean, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, all of these things. The Democrats had a chance to turn these confirmation hearings into a real expose on the unseriousness of MAGA, or the unserious in terms of substance, but also the dangers. I'm not sure that they did that in the last week. So they didn't get their act. They have not yet gotten their act together. They are going to have to figure out which of the issues are going to be the most salient. We started off talking about, separating the signal from the noise.
Yes.
You know, like for some reason he wants us to be talking about Greenland when he's doing something over here, and I got to figure out what it is that he's over here. We've spent a lot of time beating up on the Democrats. And I just want to say that my frustration is because right now the Democrats are the only guardrail against what Trump is doing, and if they screw this up, then we are all screwed. So our criticism is not anti-democratic. It's like, look, this is your moment. You're going to have to focus. I actually think they have some real potential dealing with the fact that Trump, who ran as a populist man of the people, has created a organization, has created an administration dominated by elitist billionaires and oligarchs. Oligarchs might not be the best word. I love it though. Um, and so there's going to be that tension. There's something absurd about a populist movement that is run by super rich people for the benefit of super rich people. I say this as a conservative, but it's like, really, they're not making any efforts to really cover up what they are. If the Democrats cannot find a way to poke holes in Donald Trump's man of the people thing, then I think they probably ought to find a different profession.
I it's funny you mention that because when people say like, "What's the most amazing thing about this last decade in politics?" Like,
Mm.
what's obviously there's a million things you could pick. The thing that I always come back to, the thing that I'm like Gollum polishing the
Yeah.
ring on, is
Precious.
a man who was raised in wealth,
Yeah.
never lived outside of New York City and really Manhattan, but New
Yeah.
York City in his entire adult life until 2 years ago. A man whose brand was gold plated, but
Gold
luxury,
toilets. Yeah.
right? Whose hotels cost $600, $700 a night to stay in. That guy, and to be honest, I give him some level of credit for this because it's stunning to me that he was able to do this. That guy became the voice against the elites. I mean, he's that would be like Chris Cillizza went to private, grew up in Connecticut, went to private boarding school in high school, went to Georgetown as a journalist. It would be like me being like, I am a man of the people. No, I mean, it's making sense. It's unsellable.
Yeah.
It's to your point, like, I still don't understand how the hell he pulled that off. And Democrats allowed him to occupy that space.
Well, since we're beating up on Democrats, is because they had, I think, become rather elitist themselves. What I noticed here in Wisconsin is that the Democrats became kind of a barbell party. Was well-educated elites and perhaps the poor, but the working class was completely ignored, taken for granted.
Hmm.
Okay, but let's go back to this thing. How does the guy who flies around in his private jet,
Right.
marries supermodels, has gold-plated toilets? How does he become the populist king? Well, in part because he is their vision of a successful man. You know,
Aspirational. Right.
that's right.
Yes.
But that's not the key. And Donald Trump is not a great strategic thinker, but he has, and I've said this before, has the reptilian instinct, and he knew that in order to tap into that, he needed to tap into their resentments. He hated the people they hated. He was willing to go after them. He was willing to take them off. He picked the right enemies, and he put a name on it. He put a face on it. You are dissatisfied with your life. You feel that you're being ignored, and he said it's because of these people. And in the first round, it was these brown people, these Mexicans, these Chinese people. But he's been able to continue to, evolve the resentments into people who use the different language, don't care about you. And unfortunately, too often Democrats played into that. That's why, going back to the $100 million ad, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe in American political history any party or candidate has ever invested as much
No.
in he's for us, they are for them, whatever. That became kind of the symbol, and Democrats haven't figured out how to counter that. At least at the national level, the fact that you have these Democrats who were able to win in these states that Trump won shows that some of them get it. You
Hmm.
know, Slotkin gets it, Gallego gets it. I see a number of these candidates who are willing to do it, but that's what they're going to be hashing out over the next 2 to 4 years, right?
And that just to finish where we started. I mean, I think that's your bubbles point, right? It's
Yep.
like it is unless you are living in an information and partisan bubble, it is impossible to look at this moment that we are going to have in 3 days and think everything's fine with the Democratic Party. We're going to be great, right? Like I stand by this even if
Anybody
you
saying
want.
that? Is anybody actually saying
I
that?
think there are Democrats who are saying we don't need to change because the reason that Trump won, I hear this a lot. Trump
Okay.
won. There are 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump ish. Those are either racists or misogynists or intolerant, or they're willing to tolerate those behaviors. And therefore, we don't need to change because we're the tolerant, equitable, free thinking party. So why would we change anything? And I always say, it's like, I'm not saying that you need to become racist, but I think that dichotomy, that kind of black and white, not
Yeah.
racial, but black and white, that analysis leaves people. I think that is not a winning mentality. That like you, so you won a moral victory, I guess, but you didn't win an actual victory. I
Well,
think
I mean,
there
yeah,
is some of that coursing
right.
through.
Well, I mean, of course, there's some truth in that bundle, but again, going back, I'm sorry, the bubble is like, okay, if you are actually concerned about crime, are you by definition of racist? No. If you are concerned about the explosion at the border, are you a total xenophobe? No. There are these issues that,
Yep.
in fact, are legitimate concerns. And if you actually talk to people, you recognize that these are legitimate concerns. The problem is, and I think David Frum wrote this in the Atlantic a few years ago. He said, if pro-democracy, liberal, humane politicians do not fix the border, the public will turn to the fascists. They will turn to the cruelest people. The other sense of denial that I see, that I hear is, well, it was because of inflation or because of
Yeah.
some just some temporary issue, or blame the media for it. All of which then become excuses not to rethink how you got here. But I do think there is one area of optimism that I would point out here, is that Kamala Harris lost because, what, 10 million or so people who voted
Yeah, I
for
think it
Joe
was
Biden
eight.
stayed
Yes.
home.
Yes.
8.
Eight
Okay.
to 10. Yep.
So this does suggest that there is still an anti-Trump majority out there. They didn't turn out for the election, you know, God knows, and they've got to figure out why they didn't, but they are there. The other source of optimism would be, and you've followed this for a very, very long time, is all political parties overread their mandates, as the
Always.
Democrats did 4 years
It's
ago.
it's the most
They
bipartisan thing in history.
always overreach. This group that's coming in now is going to be as extreme and aggressive, pedal to the metal, ramming speed, almost a classic example of overreading your mandate, going too far. And part of this, things change. You know, there's two models of history, right? The pendulum or the ratchet. I think that sometimes we're too optimistic and thinking, well, things swing back, and they swing back and forth, because sometimes you lose something, something's broken, it stays broken, the ratchet keeps going down. But the reality is that normally, and we've seen this before, parties come in filled with hubris and triumphalism, and they misread the moment, they misread the mood. There are a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump that are not going to buy into all of the things that are going to drop on Monday and Tuesday,
Nope.
and that's an opportunity for Democrats, but and it's a challenge to America, okay? Because I mean, I'm the day after the election, I kind of wrote, "This is us." We knew who
Yeah.
Donald Trump was, and the American people
Totally.
voted
No
for Donald Trump.
mystery. No
The big
mystery in 2024.
so, but it's not a one-time test. I mean, America is an evolving country. It's a changing country. It can grow. It can make mistakes. It can come back from the mistakes. It'll be interesting to see how they respond to this.
All right, so I'm not going to go any longer, but I wanted a couple things. One, if you have not, if you do not already follow Charlie, I really hope you do. The
Thank
Substack is called To the Contrary. Um, Again, thoughtful and unpredictable are two I take to be two. Those are sort of the highest praise I can give to people, because I
thank
feel
you.
like there's so much predictability out there where it's like I don't even need to open the email. I know what that person's going to say. You know what I mean? It's like, so
Yeah.
I don't need to read that. Charlie is not that. While also maintaining principle, right? He's not just willy nilly all over the place, while maintaining principle, but also saying, let's take each thing as it comes. So if you do not already follow Charlie, please do.
Thank you. Thank
Second,
you.
uh, I'm going to do more of these, and Charlie, I hope that you will be a regular sort of,
I would love to.
not every week. I don't want to bug you too
Yeah.
much, but I really do think we're at a moment where smart people need to sort of all get together and think. People, not even smart people, are curious and focused on this stuff and think, okay, what's happening right now? where have we come from and where are we going? I really think that kind of stuff, it makes me smarter, and I think it's critically important to this moment. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
And I will ping you very shortly about doing it again. So you've roped your by being good, you've roped yourself into doing it again. So that's on you.
I apologize. I apologize for that. But again, we're not promising people a safe space here. I mean, this is the thing is that, and by the way, I'm very flattered by what you just said. My father and I, who was very involved in politics, we used to argue about politics all the time. And the worst insult that we could give to one another was, "Oh, you're so predictable." I grew up with that as the
That's so
one thing you
interesting.
don't want to be is always predictable.
Totally
So
agree.
thank you.
I totally agree. All right, my friend. Take
All right.
care. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
weekend.
You too. Bye bye.
Thanks for joining us. Take care.